You think he would prosecute this? You think he would happily seek to try and obtain that compensation now he knows it could well be a possibility?
Oh, yeah. Primary concern for Gerry Adams is to establish the legitimacy of the IRA campaign.
Even if the individual's a terrorist.
Even if the individual's a terrorist. The point is there was a mistake made in the internment order with all the outstanding cases and all the outstanding crimes. And you measure that against the possibility that Gerry Adams will benefit because of a cock-up made by the government themselves, a cock-up in introducing internment in the first place, which was a disaster, and a cock-up in the documentation around Gerry Adams' case.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, that's on February the 24th. And finally to Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of those dates. The link will be in the description below. We're really excited to see you there.
The IRA is gone. And I mean, my position has been consistent that I was not a member of the IRA, but I've never distanced myself from the IRA.
So were you never tempted to join?
No, I wasn't. No.
That was the voice of Gerry Adams speaking about 6 years ago. He was the leader of Sinn Féin. He denies there that he was ever involved with the IRA. But as a result of a change to the law that the Labour government is making, it is possible that he may shortly be in receipt of taxpayer-funded compensation for his experiences during the Troubles.
Yeah, in the 1970s, he was interned without trial, and he has been pursuing compensation from the British government since about 2020. Is it possible that this change to the law would see taxpayer-funded compensation go to Gerry Adams? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's Lewis.
It's Emily.
And of course, Gerry Adams, despite his denials there, many people believe, historians, people around at the time, have said that he was a very, very senior member of the IRA, responsible for the disappearing of people, responsible, many people would say, for murder. And that is why this proposed change could be so controversial. Just to explain what this is about, last month Hilary Benn, the Northern Ireland Secretary, unveiled plans to change provisions in some legislation that was passed by the Tory government that bars compensation payments to those who were interned without trial during the Troubles in the 1970s. Internment basically just means locked up without charge. The Northern Ireland office have done this to change the Northern Ireland Troubles Act because they say that as it currently stands, it could breach Britain's obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. But as a result, a report from Policy Exchange, a conservative-oriented think tank, which has been published this week, says that lots of people who many people believe were responsible for violence during the Troubles, including the very, very controversial figure of Gerry Adams, could be eligible for significant sums of money paid for by the British taxpayer.
Simply put, I guess the question is whether, if you deem a policy or a practice to be unlawful, if you want to overturn that, if you want to pay compensation to that, should you be paying compensation to people widely regarded as terrorists? And that somehow sits at the very heart of this question that we're going to be discussing today. Firstly, with the biographer of Gerry Adams, and later with a Conservative critic who is in fact the Shadow Secretary for Northern Ireland.
And this came up, this question, at PMQs today. Because, and we can talk about the politics of this a bit later, because I think it is one of those things that could really rumble on. And it might sound, particularly if you're not familiar with the history of it, particularly if you're young and you don't remember Gerry Adams and what a big figure he was, it might sound a bit kind of historic and odd and kind of obscure, but it won't be. It's one of those things that, particularly on the right of British politics, is really emotionally charged, particularly the role of Gerry Adams. And Kemi Badenoch, Tory leader, brought it up at PMQs today and asked Keir Starmer whether he was going to prevent it from happening.
It turns out his government may write a cheque to compensate Gerry Adams. This is shameful. We left him the fastest. We left him the fastest growing economy in the G7. In just 6 months, under his leadership, it's been taxes up, borrowing up, mortgage rates up, and that's not all. Business confidence is down, jobs are down, growth is down. Can the country afford 4 more years of his terrible judgments?
Mr. Speaker, among that barrage of complete nonsense, there is one point that I need to address, because it's the Legacy Act, and it will be of real interest across the House. That Act was unfit because, or not least because, it gave immunity to hundreds of terrorists and wasn't supported by victims in Northern Ireland, nor, I believe, by any of the political parties in Northern Ireland. The court found it unlawful. We will put in place this is a serious point. We will put in place a better framework. We're working on a draft remedial order and replacement legislation, and we will look at every conceivable way to prevent these types of cases claiming damages. And it's important I say that on the record.
Starmer there saying they'll strive to find a way round this, not to pay money to terrorists or terrorism. And many of you recently might have seen the drama that has been playing out on Disney called Say Nothing. It's the work of Patrick Radden Keefe, and the drama tells the story of one of the disappeared, a mother of 10, Jean McConville, and the part the IRA and indeed Gerry Adams may have had in her death.
Yeah, and it's actually just worth listening to a clip from it, because it sums up, I think, the ambiguity about Gerry Adams and his role that he's played in all of this. Because, of course, by the time you get to the 1980s, Adams is already moving into the realm of politics, of being an MP.
Peace broker.
Doesn't take his seat. And already by that time, and this is after the events of his being interned and so on in the 1970s, already by that time, he is developing his, let's say, complicated account about his past. And this is a bit of the drama which shows him being interviewed by a BBC interviewer.
So this is quite something for voters to get their heads around. Marshall, it's not every day we've a candidate for Parliament who also supports the murder of British soldiers.
I don't support the murder of British soldiers.
Do you not?
I don't support the murder of anyone.
You support the armed struggle of the
I support people's right to defend themselves.
Go on, Gerry! Do you not have on your conscience some of the things that have happened? The innocent victims of the IRA.
Well, I regret, as anyone regrets anyone being killed. I even regret, as it may surprise you, British soldiers being killed. But it isn't on my conscience that these things happen.
Too fucking right, Gerry. Too fucking right, big man.
And each one of us is...
Joining us now is Malachy O'Doherty. He's the journalist and author of Gerry Adams, An Unauthorised Life. In other words, a man who knows the character at the centre of this whole question really well. And how come, Malachy, we are even talking about paying out compensation to this man?
Well, Gerry Adams was interned in 1972. He was a leading Republican. He denies that he was a senior member of the IRA, but those who interned him assumed that he was. The internment was a system for locking people up without putting them through the trial process. And it was a disaster, because it was planned that it would basically wrap up the IRA campaign and get rid of everybody, get them off the street. And indeed, it was followed by an escalation of IRA violence. So in that sense, it was a disaster. Gerry Adams contested recently, just a few years ago, the internment order that was issued against him on the grounds that it wasn't signed by the Secretary of State, who was William Whitelaw at that time. And he won his case, which, is a bit surprising, because you would think that the document, having been signed by a government official, was valid enough. But no, he won his case. Along comes the legacy legislation, the idea that you would not proceed with criminal actions and legal cases against people involved in the Troubles, whether members of the IRA, loyalist paramilitaries, or the British Army. Keir Starmer came along and said, no, we're going to overturn that legislation. We're going to go back and open these cases again.
And why did he need to do that? I mean, what was in it for Keir Starmer's government to say, we need to overturn this?
Well, what was in it for him was that he was meeting a major protest within Northern Ireland. Every political party in Northern Ireland was arguing that these cases shouldn't be closed. Maybe Starmer was bounced into it at a debate in Queen's University when a law lecturer called Kieran McAvoy basically asked him from the floor in front of a sympathetic audience, and he said, no, we will overturn it. Now, these are not, that is in process, and the legislation which will follow from it will perhaps not be as explicit as the legislation that preceded it, but still in all, cases will now go ahead. There will be prosecutions of people who committed crimes during the Troubles. And legal cases include civil cases, I presume, because that's why we're now talking about Gerry Adams. The argument is being put now that the best reason, and it's the stupidest reason you could imagine to my mind, that the best reason for not reversing the legislation and allowing cases to proceed is that Gerry Adams will get his compensation for having been interned. That's like saying we should do away with the pensioners' bus pass because Gerry Adams might get one. You know, it's just a daft idea that you base policy or legislation on policy or principle without considering the actual nuances of it and the content of it, but you do it simply because Gerry Adams will benefit.
You can hear, though, how triggering that would be to so many people in the UK. I mean, the bus pass doesn't quite cover it, does it?
Well, I mean, the fact is that Gerry Adams is a detested man. There's no doubt about it. He's got his following and he's liked in parts of Ireland and by Sinn Féin, and there's a legendary status to him. But yes, he is a man who touches people's nerves and funny bones in a particular way, and I don't particularly admire him or agree with him myself. But I do think that if serious political figures are discussing how you reform the law, how you deal with the whole past of Northern Ireland, with all the outstanding cases and all the outstanding crimes, and you measure that against the possibility that Gerry Adams will benefit because of a cock-up made by the government themselves, a cock-up in introducing internment in the first place, which was a disaster, and a cock-up in the documentation around Gerry Adams's case. I mean, weigh things in the balance. You do not surely define your legislation by what individual might benefit.
Even if the individual's a terrorist.
Even if the individual's a terrorist. The point is that there was a mistake made in the internment order, and a court determined that he was entitled to compensation.
Gerry Adams probably made a few mistakes in his time as well, I would imagine.
I would say he was quite deliberate in some of the bad things that he did during his life. You know, it's so to talk about mistakes. But the reality is simply, to my mind, that you do not negotiate or discuss or debate legislative reform on the basis of one individual's likely benefit from it.
Do you think, knowing his mind as you do, he has obviously pursued the British government for compensation before, you think he would prosecute this? You think he would happily seek to try and obtain that compensation now he knows it could well be a possibility?
Oh yeah, primary concern for Gerry Adams is to establish the legitimacy of the IRA campaign. I was recently sued by Jerry Kelly, one of the top IRA men who led the escape from the Maze prison, because I said that he'd shot a prison officer during the escape. I was sued. You know, the case was thrown out after 4.5 years by a judge who just said it was ludicrous that somebody who had boasted about his own part in an IRA jailbreak should be suing for damage to his character. But that is what the IRA is concerned about. That is what senior members of Sinn Féin are concerned about. They're concerned about the retrospective legitimation of the IRA campaign.
So the importance of this compensation for Adams isn't necessarily about the money, but it's about a legitimation. The legitimation that it would confer would be that the British government was accepting that his internment was wrong.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the British government, the court has accepted that his internment was wrong. The British government accepted by 1972, when William Whitelaw came in as Secretary of State, that internment had been a massive mistake, that they'd made the problem worse rather than better. And they went on to provide special category status for convicted prisoners. But deciding things on the basis of how one person benefits, it just seems daft.
Do you think you'll end up getting it? I mean, because I can see how you're arguing this as part of a bigger process. We're hearing the kind of noise that will come from this in the UK at Westminster. Yeah. I just want to know if you think you'll actually get the money.
Well, I think they may do. I mean, they've paid compensation to other IRA members for wrongful arrest. I can cite one case of a senior Republican who got compensation because he had left a bar before somebody coming to assassinate him had arrived, and yet he got compensation because the police had not done sufficient to protect him. And he got £15,000 for that. I mean, he wasn't even threatened. He wasn't in any danger at all. The UDA had set up a plan to shoot him and arrived too late to do it, and still he got compensation. The British government has been very gentle with the IRA over the years. Virtual amnesty, in the sense of so many cases not being pursued, all sorts of ways in which the IRA benefited through the peace process. In effect, the police, the RUC, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, disarmed before the IRA did.
Just for particularly younger listeners to this show who will not be aware very much of Gerry Adams, the way they might be aware of it is if they've been watching Say Nothing. The dramatisation of the superb book. And obviously, one feature of that is it basically depicts very clearly Gerry Adams' role in the IRA. Yeah. And then at the very end of each show, it says Gerry Adams has always denied he's a member of the IRA. Can you just explain to particularly those young listeners that weird incongruity? Why is it that Gerry Adams has always been so insistent that he was not involved in the IRA?
One of the suggestions raised by the judge in the libel action that I was seeing off was that a senior Republican might deny involvement or refuse to concede involvement because it would be subject to civil action. The IRA was involved in the murder of something like 1,400 people. There's an awful lot of angry people out there who have suffered great loss because of the actions of the IRA. So if there was a prospect, and there is a case in process where people are trying to take a case against Gerry Adams specifically. So I think Gerry Adams has good grounds for denying that he was in the IRA. But there's an anomaly here as well, and that is that many others who were in the IRA don't deny it and don't get the same criticism, the same attention that Gerry Adams does. It's almost as if Gerry Adams...
Martin McGuinness, it was...
Well, Martin McGuinness, Conor Murphy, currently a finance minister in Stormont. Several of the Jerry Kelly, well, he talked about he's proud of his past in the IRA, but there are other government ministers we've had at Stormont who were members of the IRA and did not get that scrutiny. And I think there's some oddity there. One, in some sense, I think that maybe Gerry Adams is like a lightning rod for that scrutiny, for that attention. I also think there's something about his own personal character, an air of smugness about him, which just annoys people. So they tend to go after him more than they go after others.
It was interesting hearing from Malachy there, him saying that he's pretty sure that if Gerry Adams can get this compensation, he will. He's not going to kind of leave it because he knows how controversial it would be, and how destabilising it could be to some elements of the peace process. He's not going to leave it, partly because I thought it was really interesting, because he sees it in a way as part of his own rehabilitation, part of the kind of the contestation over the IRA's role in the struggle.
I'm not even sure he'd call it rehabilitation.
No, he wouldn't. In his own mind,
Gerry Adams, and you think of yourself as having fought for the freedoms that, to some extent, have now kind of been enacted.
Yes.
Right? What have we seen? We've seen the Good Friday Agreement. We've seen an armistice. We've seen, an amnesty, more importantly. We've seen people let out of prison as a result of trying to move forward with something that most people now are on board with. The Good Friday Agreement has kept the peace in Northern Ireland for the last, 30 years. And it was one of the most sort of emotional drivers, I would say, Northern Ireland, of the anti-Brexit vote, which was people saying, you don't realise how hard this was to come by. So Gerry Adams, I think, would maintain that the unlawful behaviour was firmly on the part
of the British state,
of the UK government.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, completely. And as Malachy was saying as well, there is absolutely no doubt. I mean, internment not only was terrible, I mean, the security situation was terrible, and that is what the British government were trying to sort of correct. But nonetheless, internment was not only wrong, but it was completely counterproductive, and it interned lots of people who shouldn't have been there. You can have a separate discussion about Gerry Adams.
I love is that idea of the bus pass example, because you can see why, in a court of law, the bus pass example that Malachy uses works. If you're going to give people winter fuel, you have to give everyone winter fuel. If you're going to give people a bus pass, you give everyone a bus pass. Let's not make, the specific be the enemy of the good. And part of me thinks, well, Starmer has a legal brain, right? That's the point. He's a barrister. He's a former DPP. Maybe there is something that he would just sort of say, this will be one of the the sacrifices to overturn a bad law. But I just can't see him doing that. He knows the politics of that.
And part of it is also the kind of... I mean, I think there's two separate interesting political spheres about how this goes down. One is within the context of Northern Ireland politics itself, where it is part of, and it will be an important part, but it is just part of an ongoing process and an ongoing deeply contentious set of issues which have basically been part of the peace process since it began, which is, what do you do about historic grievances, about people who have done wrong, about how justice works to people we know have done wrong, and whether the British state or the Irish state or the Northern Irish state or whatever it is, which cases it chooses to prosecute, which it doesn't, which it leaves alone. And the truth is, there is very little... It's never hard and fast.
Yeah.
It's messy depending on the case.
Yeah, how long do you call stuff out for after the event?
But I suppose the difference is with this is that this is not just about saying, which has happened many times, say the release of prisoners or the release of people that we know committed murder. That was part of the peace process. That was part of the deal, that people were released who had committed murder.
It's like David Cameron calling the Bloody Sunday Inquiry, for
exactly.
example. Taking ownership of it for the British state.
And there are lots of unionists in particular who think that Gerry Adams ought to have been a prisoner, that he ought to have gone to prison. I mean, he was in prison for a while, but that he should have been brought to justice for things they think that he did. But of course, I suppose this is going one step further, right? This is not just... It's not a legal expression, but it's not letting sleeping dogs lie. It's not leaving things alone. It's the British state going...
we're sorry.
Over
Compensation
and above.
means we're sorry, doesn't it?
We're sorry, and we've done something wrong to you. And obviously, what it raises the question of is, unionists might say, well, where's our compensation? And of course, there will be compensation to different sides as part of this, but it just, again, unearths so many of those historic enmities. So that's the Northern Ireland element of it. On the British side, the dynamics are slightly different, right? Which is that for Keir Starmer, I do think if this sort of rumbles on, it is one of those things, one of those stories that can just become a kind of real lightning rod, because it is one of those things that...
It's like grooming gangs, in a way.
Totally.
It's like, are you paying taxpayer money to terrorists?
Yeah, you can imagine Elon tweeting about it, right? You can completely imagine that. You can imagine...
Don't say that.
I know,
obviously, he listens to the news agents, and it's going to be tomorrow morning.
He's one of our biggest fans. He's awake a lot, so he does need content. He's desperate for content. He's like John Sopel.
Of which more later.
Conservative Party will see it as an easy political win. The right-wing press, online life, GB News, all of it, because there is, Gerry Adams has been has been basically this sort of piñata for many, many years. He has been someone that has been...
ever been called that before.
No, I think that's probably right. But he is someone... So you can call everything else.
Mexican,
you know what? I think that's one of
Northern Irish.
I reckon that's one of the better things that people have said about him. But what I'm saying is that he has been someone who, he's an absolute favourite for obvious reasons, and often justified reasons, but obvious reasons for exactly these sort of people to keep going at again and again and again. And it does have an unusual kind of historic resonance even now, even though, of course, these events are many years ago.
I think it's a really emotional resonance. And that's why we're going to hear now from Alex Burghart. He is the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary. Alex, tell us your reaction to what you've heard today.
Well, this is unacceptable. There was a very good report published last night by Policy Exchange, which set out the legal issue that Labour is about to create by repealing the legislation that was brought forward by the last Conservative government, which explicitly ruled out people being given compensation in this way. So, we're very much opposed to it, and we will certainly be fighting it when it comes to Parliament.
What did you make of Keir Starmer's line in the Commons this lunchtime? He's basically said he is striving to make sure this doesn't happen.
Well, that's all very well, but they are committed to repeal the legislation which offers the protection to the government to give that compensation. So I think this is just words. I don't think they've thought this through.
The government has said that they've inherited a scheme from your party that had the support of no one in Northern Ireland, which was found in many cases to be unlawful, and which under your scheme, the Conservative scheme, actually gave immunity to people who have committed appalling acts of terrorism.
Emily, there's the piece of legislation we're talking about, the Legacy Act, is a very long and complex piece of legislation which dealt with many different things. And the particular part of the Act that we're talking about here was something introduced by Conservative peers in the Lords to protect what are known as the Cultona Principles. And I'll just set that up very briefly because it's quite technical. The Cultona Principles have been in place since the 1940s in the way that Britain runs its government. And it means that if an piece of legislation says a Secretary of State has to sign something off, the Secretary of State's junior minister can do it. And the judgment in the Gerry Adams case, or in the case connected to Gerry Adams, was that this was invalid. And it meant that the interim custody order that had been signed in the 1970s that had put Gerry Adams in custody was invalid. And that completely invalidated a whole long-established practice in British government. In our Act, one of the things in our Act overruled that judgment, made it clear that the Cultona Principles were protected then and now. And if the government goes ahead and repeals this Act, as it said it will take that out and Gerry Adams will be in line for compensation. We're very much opposed to that.
But Emily's point is correct, isn't it, Alex? Which is that, okay, fine, there are particular provisions that you say are problematic, but the Legacy Act overall was opposed by the Unionist parties, it was opposed by Sinn Féin, the Irish government and the US government. Therefore, they were dealing with a highly problematic piece of legislation which had actually done that very rare thing, which was to unite every stakeholder and every interest group within and coalition within Northern Ireland against it. So they had to do something, didn't they? Because the piece of legislation you passed was so imperfect.
Well, actually, there were lots of people who supported the legislation. Look, the Labour Party has won the election. It ran on a manifesto to say it would repeal the Act. It's got a mandate to do that. What we're arguing about today is this specific part of it. The Labour Party has also said it will keep a large part of the Act, which establishes the ICRIR, which is the Commission on Reconciliation and Recovery. So it's not like everything needs to be scrapped. This particular part of the Act has to be kept, or we're going to see people receive compensation that they shouldn't get. That is wrong, and we will oppose it.
Do you think it's likely that Gerry Adams will try and obtain compensation?
I assume so, but I don't know.
Do you think it's really likely? I mean, knowing Keir Starmer, knowing his work as a DPP and as a barrister as you do, that he would actually see Gerry Adams being paid out compensation under his watch? Do you honestly think that that's what we're going to see here?
I think there's a high degree of probability that will happen, yes.
And what will the Conservatives do then? You will overturn...
We will oppose the legislation that they bring forward.
Would you put back exactly the same legislation that you have introduced? In other words, the one that nobody seems to like?
Those particular clauses that we're discussing today, Emily, we would absolutely bring them back. Yes.
And what would you do differently to make sure that you hadn't lost the faith of all the parties in Northern Ireland?
We will have to see what Labour brings forward. We have no idea what the legislative framework will be when, should we win the next election, but we will be looking at that very, very closely. And look, what we're keen to do, as we did through the establishment of the ICRIR, which the Labour government is committed to keep, which is actually the large part of the Legacy Act legislation, and what we are keen to do is to make sure that there was a means by which we could start to move on from that terrible period in UK history. So, I make absolutely no apologies for that. Today, it's very important that the government changes its mind and comes up, make sure that in its next piece of legislation, it protects the Cultona Principles so people like Gerry Adams do not get compensation.
Your Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, has said that the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, expressed concern about the Attorney General, said he represented Gerry Adams in 2023 and said, "We urgently need to know whether he was involved with the decision to abandon a winnable appeal, which now leaves his former client in line for a payout." Do you think the Attorney General should recuse himself from this matter?
I think that there are a lot of unanswered questions in this. I noticed that it was raised in Select Committee, I think, by Ashley Fox yesterday, and Lord Herman gave a very evasive answer. So there are definitely unanswered questions.
How would you just personally, as a British politician, a senior British politician, in the event that Gerry Adams were to receive compensation, how would you feel about that? What message do you think it would send?
Well, I think it would be. I think a lot of people in the country would be very angry, and I think that if you're, all of the pressures on the public purse at the moment, I think that's the last thing that most taxpayers will want. So. We're here to represent those views.
Alex Burghart, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Before we go, we're going to end with a quotation. In fact, it is a Chinese proverb.
Oh, I thought you were going to do more Mel Stride Shakespeare stuff for a moment.
I loved that, but no. This is the proverb. If you stand by the riverbank long enough, the body of your enemy will eventually float past.
Who said that?
Well, we don't know who said it, but the person who quoted it was John Sopel in his Times profile, A Life in the Day today.
Does John mention which bodies he's got in mind? Is it? It's not ours, is it?
We've been fantasising about that all morning.
It makes him sound so bad. Like, so fierce. Badass, John.
Badass.
Yeah.
John describes his life in detail, and it seems to involve a life that none of us recognise, which is going home quietly, eating sea bass with no flavour, and watching Netflix. When we all
he's a man of his generation. It's very important that men of that generation, they never flavour anything. It's very important to have plain fillets of fish.
John. We know what John's like. John never goes home. He goes out the whole time. He's the most sociable man in NATO. He is up at all hours. He's talking to everyone, and I didn't know that he stood by a river waiting for his enemies' bodies to float past.
I like to unwind in the evening with something on Netflix. My nightly routine at 11 o'clock is the Times quick cryptic crossword. Half an hour of brain exercise.
Well, maybe.
That's putting it generously. The proper cryptic crossword is too difficult for me, but the quick cryptic is my treat.
Yeah.
My treat.
Well, look,
he's usually with a politician from the 90s in Ronnie's at that time of night.
He's with everyone. If you have been missing John, as indeed we have, we urge you to go and read.
Go to the riverbank. We urge you to go to the riverbank, and you will see him at the riverbank just watching body after body, enemy, foe after foe of John Sopel just going past.
Well,
don't cross him. That's my message. That's my Chinese proverb.
But do
cross
find
John
out
Sopel.
about his very exciting day.
He'll be back so soon. We're counting down the days.
We are.
A few more sleeps.
We love you.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.